Hey there, I'm John McDavitt. I'm your host of the Breakthrough Creative, where we talk about the business of art and the art of business. And I'm really excited today to have my buddy Greg Eichelberger here. Greg is, and when I say buddy, we're really tight. He's one of my best friends. We happen to pastor a church together. We've started two churches together, and have been in each other's lives for quite a while. How you doing, Greg?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good, man. I'm really glad to have you here with your Blackhawks mug, sipping some coffee. This is probably the
Gotta have
earliest
that.
earliest recording I've ever done, but it's fun. So Greg is he's probably the best musician I've ever known, and I mean that along a lot of different lines. He's a guitarist. He has a background in heavy metal, rock and roll, and we're going to get into some of that. But he's had quite an interesting arc in his career, and that apart from becoming a pastor, which is an interesting switch from heavy metal music, uh,
A bit.
he has a sound and engineering studio, and he's sitting in it right now. So it's pretty cool stuff. So I'm gonna kind of just take you back kind of early, Greg. How did you get interested in music? What's the story? Like, I don't know it, but nobody else knows who's listening. So what's the story?
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's kind of funny because I didn't grow up in a artsy house. My dad was kind of a farmer slash mechanic, German, awesome guy, just not really creative. I guess he played accordion at one time, and that probably cured him of any future musical endeavors. uh, my mom couldn't carry a tune if she tried. It wasn't that kind of house. But growing up in suburbia, a suburb of Chicago in the 70s, um, us kids, we were looking for adventure and escape and anything to relieve the boredom. And I just got turned on to rock music at a young age. And the band that was sort of my gateway was Kiss. When I heard them, I just was just head over heels. I was like totally into them, and it wasn't long before I traded my tennis racket, which I used to do air guitar with, for an actual guitar. My dad came home from work one day and he said that it had fallen off the back of a truck. So I don't know where he got it. It was a cheap acoustic. It came with a little 45 record. This is how old I am. A 45 record. I don't know how many of your listeners will even know what that is, but you could hear a sound out of it, and it made the sound for each string so you could tune it by ear. And that was how I learned how to tune the guitar. And I just started plunking away. And when you're young like that, you have endless hours to devote to. You don't realize you're working. You're just
Yeah.
exploring and having fun, and the hours float by. And I'd be picking up the needle of the record player, moving it back, trying to play the match what I was hearing to what I was playing, move the needle back, move the needle back. And I taught myself and started playing guitar. And that was a lifelong love affair that continues to this very day.
Wow. So you really, I mean, it was all hearing, right? And to find the right fingering.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of searching to do. But like you say, as a kid, you don't know you're working, and then you find it.
Right. And, later on in more professional musical settings, because I'm self-taught, I've kind of sort of like came around and backfilled theory and knowledge and things like that. But because I'm an ear learned player, uh, a nickname that was given to me was Popeye, because it was like you know how Popeye's forearms are real big and the rest of him is really skinny. The idea was my ears are really big, you know, but the rest of it is like, that's sort of my, I guess my musical superpower isn't necessarily chops or knowledge, it's ears. You know, I somehow can connect what I'm hearing to, you know, I know it's right when I hear it type thing. And that's served me well in as I transitioned into other musical areas of, you know, producing, arranging, engineering, recording, all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, that's awesome. That's amazing. So you're learning this stuff. You've got this ear, however it developed, whether it was like gift from God or, you know, it's something that just grew with you. And so then you pick up an electric guitar at some point, right? So you got the acoustic, you pick up an electric. That was in high school?
oh, that was pre-high school. Yeah,
Okay.
I was still like junior high.
All right.
Yeah,
So
I started young.
yeah. So then you've kind of gotten some degree of mastery over the guitar by the time you're out of high school.
Oh yeah, yeah. We so my best buddy at that time wanted to pick up guitar too. My buddy Jose,
Yeah.
uh, and his brother was a year older and played drums, and he was already in a band. So me and Jose would just kind of play in the bedroom and learn stuff. But eventually, we got good enough to lure his brother away from the band he was in. That was like monumental. Like wow. So then we had a band, and a watershed moment was we were starting to get sort of known in our little neighborhood. You know, we'd have the garage door open in the summer and make noise or whatever, and kids would come by and sit. But the beginning of freshman year of high school, they had they call it the Gong Show. There's another ancient reference, but you know, a talent show, and we our band entered it, and we stole the show. We won it. So um, the following Monday, coming back into school, it was literally like it was like a movie. Like everyone looked at me different. You know, everyone like you're that guy in the band. You know, and that was like literally like you know within a week or two of freshman year starting. So that the cement dried at that point. You know, I was like that was my identity. I knew what I was going to do for the rest of my life. I was going to be a rock star. There was no stopping me. And I was fully devoted to that. And by the time I think it was that summer after high school, I did not choose to go to college because that's not where rock stars were made. So I just saw it as holding me back. Um, and I joined a band that was, you know, on the road. They came and picked me up, and I waved bye to mom and dad and loaded my gear up, and I was off on an adventure. So
And didn't that begin
yeah,
your career in hot dogs and ramen?
yeah.
I've
Another love that sort of continues to this day, but I try to not admit it very much. But yeah, you know, I mean, it was not. We were, you know, there were elements of the rock star life that we were living. You know, we were playing shows, we were on the road, but there were other elements that were very far away from stardom. You know, we had no money, we had no you know, and so yeah, ramen was I think ramen has fueled many careers. So on a good day we'd chop up some hot dogs and put it in there, and that was luxury, you know. My goodness.
So you're on the road, you're in a bus, and then you're playing gigs, and then somehow you end up out in LA, right? Did you end up out in LA with that band? Or was it a different band?
Sort of, you know, sort of. Bands sort of evolve over time. You know, one person will leave, and then you'll recruit another person from, you know, someone you knew, this, that, and the other. And by 1985, so that puts me at 21. My goodness. Um, we sort of realized that that was the mecca, like if you really wanted to make it, which up till that point we hadn't done, that was where you had to go to do it. So some of the guys in the band had fallen off at that point, and the remaining group of guys agreed to go out there, and we did. And this was Hollywood in its heyday, Sunset Strip, LA. It was a hit factory. Bands were getting signed out of there right and left. And I'll never forget my first night out on Sunset Strip. And uh, I'd always been sort of a bigger fish in smaller ponds, and uh, just seeing that sea of people, and it was like club hopping, like all the infamous famous clubs were all in a row, and every guitar player was just a million times better than me. It was heady and humbling and surreal all at the same time. I was just so ready to just pack it up and head back. It was daunting, but we wound up staying out there. I stayed out there for about 3 years. So
I have
yeah.
to add at this point for anybody watching or listening that Greg is incredibly humble. So I don't know that that last statement was entirely trustworthy about every guitarist being so much better than him, because he's again, I'll just say he's pretty humble. So with that being said, you're playing on the Strip, right, with your band. You're waiting for that contract to come. It doesn't come, and you come back to Chicago, and so you've kind of got this transition going on. Tell me about that transition.
Well, it's it's hard to tell that story fully without spiritualizing it, because that's where my faith was absolutely significant. Um, that was a turning point in my life, and to summarize it quickly, uh, a God that I didn't know up until that point literally took away my desire for everything that I was doing out there. Much of it was not very savory. um, but up until then, that was my life. I was all the way in, committed,
It was rock and roll
not only,
lifestyle.
and everything that went with it. And
Yeah.
that it was just my thing, and I never questioned that it would someday not be my thing. It was my identity. It was my identity. And over a period of months, the taste for it all fell off of me. It's really hard to describe, but and I just decided to come home, and it was very much to me, tail between my legs. It was like, okay, the conquering roving rock star comes back to his small town, having not succeeded in my mind, and uh, I cried the whole way home. I remember my little Ford Ranger pickup with all my gear in the back, and it was like I didn't know who I was. I lost my identity, and I came home, went back into mom and dad's house, in my little basement apartment. And my dad owned a auto parts store for a long time, so it was a very mom and pop. And just went back to work there, and just it was like just starting over. It was just like starting over. That's what it was. Um, the reason why I say God is just because God was no part of my life whatsoever. But the girl I was living with in California, who was very like angrily uh, against God, like she wasn't, uh, she kind of had a you know had an issue with God, and she would verbalize that. Where I was just kind of like whatever. But when I told her I was leaving, and she was just incredulous and like, why are you leaving? What's the matter? And what came out of my mouth literally was, I could never spend the rest of my life with someone who doesn't believe there's a God. And she looked at me just like, what? What are you talking about? And I'm like, I don't know why I said that, but I'm leaving. And I did, and I left. So it wasn't till a couple of years later that faith started to find me. But in that time, ironically, from an artistic standpoint, once I got back and word got out that I was back, I was asked to join really what became the, you know, my band, you know, like the band of my heart, you know, and it's funny because I found it right back home after all those travels, and just a really amazing band that did lots of cool stuff together. And so my art was re-engaged. You know, it did. I thought maybe I'd be chucking it when I came home, but it was anything but.
Well, and you just had a reunion. Well, not a reunion, I guess, but you guys have been going
Yeah,
through the years, but you just played a couple of years ago at a big rock bar down in the city. So you can say the band's
yeah,
name.
yeah. Red Baron, two D's, two R's. Yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, uh, love that band, and yeah, we never got the record deal either. But by then it was into, you know, late '80s into early '90s, and our style of music was dropping out of vogue thanks to Nirvana. Uh, and we stuck it out for a little while, but I got married in '91, and within a couple years later, it just sort of fizzled out. Amicable, you know, wonderful guys, dear friends, just kind of, we all, I guess, you know, started focusing on other things. And, you know, there was another band I had after that that actually got a record deal, but that turned incredibly sour. It's after so many years of wanting a deal so bad, and when I finally got one and saw the business mechanics involved, it was just horrific. Like, it got me to the point where literally I sold most of my stuff, you know, the last guitar, and put it in the case and slid it under the bed, and I was done. For a few years, like literally done. Like I hardly touched the guitar. I didn't do anything at all. It just soured me really bad. But you know, again, by then, mid '90s, a lot of things happened in my life. You know, I got married. Uh, One of the greatest things that has ever happened to me. My wife is incredible. You know that, John. And
She's a rock
found
and
faith,
roller too.
and she's a rock and roller too. Interestingly enough, yeah. Um, but yeah, just really dedicated my life to Jesus the same way that I had my music,
Yeah.
all in. And she was my partner in that, and is to this day. So um, got serious about the auto parts business for a while, because I felt like, hey, that's the responsible thing to do. You know, we started a family. We had 3 kids in 4 years. They came in quick succession. So that it was a complete pivot in every way. And for a while, I just kind of thought the music thing was just done, which turned out to not be the case at all.
Yeah. So up to that point, you know, you've lived the rock and roll lifestyle. You've really expanded upon your skill and your craft as a guitarist and a musician. You've exhausted that avenue. You've had this awakening of faith with God. You've returned home, and then you're putting the guitar away as you're starting this new life, this marriage, and you're in corporate now. So how did that start to shape you? Because I know corporate and church at that point were really a big part of your life, and then you made some big decisions along the way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, suffice to say, um, I had what turned out to be a very successful run moving into corporate in the auto parts world, because I had grown up in dad's parts store, and I knew that world inside and out, even though it wasn't my heart, you know, it was just something I knew. Um, Very successful, made more money than I ever thought I would see. Like it was just like crazy. But um, once again, my it just fell off of me. Like it was just, it wasn't the right fit. And I was dutiful for a while because I just thought, hey, you know, that's the responsible thing to do. But again, luckily, Vanessa, my wife, she's my true partner in all things. And um, I just really felt there was something greater. There was something, uh, you know, I wasn't done having adventures yet, you know, but the adventures were going to look a lot different. And I heard God's voice in that too. So I really felt like this was something God was asking me to do. And I didn't want to over spiritualize it, because sometimes us Christians can do that. We can fall in love with an idea and kind of slap the God sticker on it to, you know, justify it. And I didn't want to do that. But um, in, boy, right, right before 9/11, bad timing, 2000, 2001, I left that career, and I did a precipitous financial free fall. It was just and this is fact. Like in my tax returns, I went from six figures to four in 1 year.
And not a
Crazy.
high four.
No, not even a high four. Yes. Woo. It was suicide in some ways. But um, to backfill that a little bit, when my wife and I got really involved with church, it was a very artsy church. And, you know, I had grown up Catholic, so there was none of that kind of stuff. But the church that we found Jesus in, uh, they had a rock band up there, you know, you know, drums, guitar, all this cool stuff. And they knew that we were musicians, and they would kind of like stalk us a little. We were trying to just sit in the back and soak it all in, and they were like, you're musicians, you know, come on. And they were trying to recruit us. And eventually it got so annoying to the point where I gave them one of my band CDs, and I picked like the most horrifically, the lyrics were just very horrible. And it just, I was like, they'll never bother us again, honey, trust me, this is like Christian repellent, here you go. And they actually, the arts director guy, called me up like the following Monday and said, hey, so this CD, I was like, yeah. He's like, track two, are you playing the guitar solo on that? And I said, yeah. He goes, all right, you're in. And I was just like, I did not expect that at all. But anyway, that kick started, you know, I had to pull the guitar out from under the bed and dust it off and sort of
How many years
re-engage
would you
my
say that
chops.
is? How many years would you say that was between the guitar going under and coming back out?
Probably a 2 or 3, like, you know,
Hmm.
2 or 3 years. It was definitely felt like forever, you know, because again, from the time I was about 12 or 13, the guitar, not a day went by that that guitar wasn't in my hand, you know, for hours a day. Like I just, it was like an arm or a leg, you know, it was a part of my, and so that was a real, boy, it was like relearning how to walk on what, like it just, you know. But again, looking back, it was very healthy because it needed to be stripped from my identity, because what we do is not who we are. And I think artists are uh, really, we tend to have a hard time separating those things. And it was, it needed to be violently separated from me. So that's kind of what it took. But, you know, thanks to the church, oddly enough, is what re-engaged my art. Now, of course, the music style was, you know, a bit different from what I was doing in my bands, but it was not a hard transition. And I mean, that started a journey that continues to this day as well. And so that just led to just all kinds of things. But to summarize that, um, surprisingly, I learned a very key and valuable lesson that has served me well to this day, which is that um, skill sets can cross platforms. You know, so what I mean by that is this. Um, you know, I had learned to play guitar live, and now all of a sudden at church, I was the seasoned, you know, better. And the band at that church was primarily like, you know, music teachers and band directors. These were like, you know, they all had their sheet music out. I couldn't read sheet music, so I'd have to listen to the cassette, you know, 20 times and play along with it to learn the song. But in rehearsals, sometimes there'd be a clunker part, and they'd all be like, "Up, you know, bar 84, you know, it's blah blah blah," and I'm like, "What are you guys playing?" "Well, we're playing an A," and I'm like, "No, I'm playing a C." And they're like, "Nope, chart says A." And then we'd go back and listen to the cassette and be like, "Okay, everyone, chart's wrong. Remark your chart, bar 84." And I was just like, because my ears, you know, and so that led to other things. Like, for example, a few years later, I was called to another church that was much less. It was a newer church, and they needed a lot of help. And all of a sudden, the, you know, thousands of times I had set up PA and, you know, set up, tear down, hook things up, was a skill set to me that I didn't even see as a skill set. Suddenly, it was incredibly valuable to the cause, and that's what led to me eventually. And this is after I had quit my job and I was doing studio work, but that led to my first vocational ministry job, which was tech, music and tech for a church, the church we met at, John. So,
Yeah.
um, and a lot of other skills as well. Interpersonal dynamics, you know, live on a bus with 5 other people, you know, for 3 years straight. You learn plenty of interpersonal skills, what leadership looks like, what followership looks like, what teamwork looks like, what uh, forbearance and grace looks like, and giving each other space, all those kind of things. Maintaining relationships with club owners and other bands, booking agents, you know, all that stuff just suddenly sprung back to life in a ministry setting as well as in a studio setting. That's a whole other, I could go on and on about the things I learned not in a studio that served me so well in a recording studio. And I just think I was late to the party, but I sort of realized at some point to always understand what your skill set is. And you know, there's this concept of skill stacking, where you sort of you take all this sort of things that you're just really good at and are passionate about, and stack them together, and then out of that you can look and see areas where that can be uh, well, among other things, monetized. So you know, I had all these seemingly disconnected, disparate giftedness and passion, and suddenly they all kind of congeal in these areas. And it's like, hey, I've got a master's degree in something that I never even thought about.
Yep. You know, it's funny, that term talent stacking is attributed to Scott Adams, and he's the guy who started Dilbert, and it's very interesting to listen to him talk about that. And what I didn't realize until I heard the term, until somebody put a name to it, that's what I had been doing my whole career as well. It's like I didn't even realize that I was I was skill stacking or talent stacking. And, you know, in Greg's situation, in his case, the way that he is made and the way that he has responded to, I would say, situations in his life, he's again, an incredible musician. He understands the ins and outs of music, even though he can't read sheet music. I can read sheet music, but big deal, you know. I can't explain music or perform music like Greg can, and then Greg's soft skills are incredible as well. Greg is really good at you know, kind of in a moment discerning what's going on in the situation, relationally, breaking down communication to be able to whittle out the truth of things and to clarify it. And it's worked really well in ministry. It's worked really well in the studio, which we're going to get into studio talk in a minute. It's worked really well, I would say, maritally, you know, and raising kids.
Amen.
But when we take our art and whatever it is we do, if we play guitar, if we draw pictures, and if we limit it to that area, you just don't go as far. You don't have, I mean, I don't want to say that that's absolute, because there have been artists throughout the centuries they do their thing, and then that's what they do. They output it. But it seems to me you've got a better chance of success if you stack things together and leverage them to be able to, you know, whatever it is you want to do. If you want it to benefit a relationship, if you're looking to monetize something and earn, whatever it is, if you can congeal, like Greg said, that stuff, you've got just a better shot to do well. I don't know. What do you think of that, Greg?
Yeah, I take two things from that. The first one is, you know, talent stacking and building out of that, to me, is sort of like, it's increasing your odds, you know, like it's broadening the field, you know. If you can see your skill set in that way, it's sort of like if you're playing the lottery, it's like you're able to buy more tickets, you know. It's like there's still the jackpot, but now you're far more likely to cash in on it than the person who only has one ticket.
Yep.
So that's one thing. And that kind of plays into the second thing, which is sort of another big theme for my wife and I and our artistic endeavors, which is to have multiple revenue streams. You know, so like that's the flip side of that idea, which is that you know, within your base of what you do, try to look for every market or every area that your I guess the product of you, you know, the part of you that's marketable, your services, the things that you offer, look beyond just the one little area that you might have, you know, only seen yourself in. Because you know, the recording studio really is a great example of that for me. So the recording studio, you know, that sort of ran concurrent with a lot of my story that I was telling. And the reason how it started, I had been in recording studios for years, you know, since the late 70s. And, you know, back then it was, you know, the big tape machines, very expensive. Musicians didn't go on the other side of that window. You know, that's where the technical people were. It was extremely costly. Us poor bands would have to save and save and save and save just for the privilege of entering into one of these studios. And you'd have to, the clock's ticking, you know, and you'd have to hurry up and play safe. We were never happy with our recordings because we weren't playing with the same reckless abandon you were when you were live, because the clock was ticking and the clock meant money, and you had to hurry up and not, because if you made a mistake, everyone would have to start over. And And then the people on the other side of the glass, the recording engineer experts, would treat the sound and mix it the way they wanted. You didn't have any say in that. And then they'd hand you your cassette on the way out the door, and you'd pop it in the car and be very disappointed. This just happened over and over and over again. So
You
many
didn't
demo
even have
tapes.
the
And
tracks, right? You didn't have the raw material either. You just had the final
what
product.
would we do with it? Because it was
Right.
on this giant reel, and they uh, we couldn't play it on anything. And then uh, studios had this thing where, a reel of tape, let's say like 2-inch tape, 15 minutes worth, depending on the speed you ran the tape at, was like $300. And in early 80s dollars, that was an incredible amount of money. That was on top of the cost of the hourly rate of the studio. That was just for the tape. So what unfortunately, what was very common for bands like us was that we would rent the tape. So in other words, we'd record, and then we'd leave with our mixed version, and then they'd record the next band right over top of the tape that they had. So there was no going back to those tracks.
Hmm.
They don't exist anymore. So all you have is that mixed cassette, and if it was mixed poorly, there's no unmixing it. And younger people today that have only grown up with computer recording, just it blows their mind to even think of. There's just so many limitations attached to that old way of doing things, and um, such as it was though. So uh, fast forward years later, when we started to re-engage musically within the church, um, Vanessa, she's a really gifted songwriter, and these songs just started coming out of her. And we started to think about, re-engaging in that whole studio world. We were incredibly broke at that time. And then I had heard from some people about these people who could record onto a computer, which, in the, late 90s, mid late 90s, even having a PC in your house was pretty esoteric. Like, it was definitely a luxury. It wasn't, every house did not have a computer, you know. But that seemed, I thought, well, maybe I can record us, So I started poking around, and I got my first computer, and found some, you know, entry level software, and same way I learned guitar, because back then there was no YouTube, there was no Google, there was no one was there to help you. Like, so I just had to figure it out. Um, and we started recording, and so here we are again, entering a sort of a new world. And the only motivation was just, I insulated, hey, I'm going to record my wife and I, period. That was my only lofty goal, to not have, we can't afford to go into a studio. Um, but because of all my experience in the studio over the years, and as a musician, and Vanessa too, she recorded albums and stuff like that. So uh, once we kind of worked out the technical stuff, it was a pretty easy transition. So um, what happened was, we eventually had enough songs to call it an album, and we pressed it ourselves. We made our own record label, with the sole intention of releasing our record, and we did, and it just did really well. It was all word of mouth, and just kind of grassroots, but um, a lot of people really loved it. And so, out of nowhere, what happened was, other bands and artists started saying, "What studio did you record that in? It sounds great." So,
Ding, ding,
uh,
ding.
I didn't see that coming, but so I didn't want to tell them there is no studio. It's in the basement of my house. So we ended the name Grevan Studios, Greg, Vanessa, you know, And in my mind, by naming it that, it was a good way to ensure that any gear purchased, I could say, hey honey, it's for you too. It's it's a very, very powerful tip if you want to invest. Don't make it a man cave, make it a he and she shed. It works out a lot better, which is still what we have to this day. So she's in here as much or more than I am, but um, that's how it started. That's how it started. Now, at this time I was working my corporate job and didn't need the money, but I was just, for the first time ever, it's like people were coming to me saying, now I was on the other side of the glass, quote unquote, where I never thought I would be. And although I lacked some of the formal training that maybe a recording engineer could have received either at a school or by interning in a big studio, what I had was just a mother lode of experience of being frustrated by the person on the other side of the glass. So my whole approach was and is to this day to always understand what it's like to be in my client's shoes at all times. Um, that that was my golden ticket, and is to this day. That is what has always separated me from so many, I guess you could call them competitors, or fellow, producers, engineers, recording studio owners. Is they tend to approach it more from the technical, here's the gear I have, I know how to work it really well, as opposed to, I'm a musician who makes music. And it's wonderful when you find uh, uh, someone who comes along with you in your journey and helps you take your vision closer to what you heard in your head. That those people are rare when you find them. Someone who really becomes your ally and your partner. And that's whenever I start working with a client in the studio, that's my approach. And then all the equipment and the gear and technology is just tools. They're I, I only love them because of the art they can produce. So
That's awesome. Yeah. So creatively, you offer, like you say, beyond the technical craftsmanship or the tools, is an opportunity to serve with and lift up the creative process for the artists that you're working with.
yeah, well put. I mean, this is stuff you just sort of, you realize that you've learned it, but you haven't um, internalized and applied it yet. Many things are that way. You sort of know them, but you're not practicing them, um, consciously and unconsciously. But the biggie for me is this idea that, and I would imagine this applies in other areas as well, but recording music, the very best recording is always to do with the performance. Like, in other words, I mean, I can do miracles with technology. It's just like, I'm sure, like Photoshop and Illustrator and all that kind of stuff and digital medium. Like, I can work magic with the computer, but I can I can make your ears happy with what you hear, but I can't make your heart sing. Like, that has to come from the performance. That you can't squeeze that out of a computer, at least not yet. I don't know if you ever will be, but um, just yesterday I received, because now everything's remote with COVID. I can't have anyone, so I work with people who work remotely. They'll send files. I'll send files and stuff like that. And I received a vocal performance yesterday that I, pulled into a session, and just, got it set up and everything, and just played it back to get a feel for it, and was moved to tears. you know that that was had nothing to do with technology. That was that's the magic. That's why we all do art at the end of the day. And I think it's really easy to forget that. I think artists forget it, especially if you're involved with technology. We get so sucked into the technology, which is important, but we forget that. We forget the magic that makes our heart sing. When I started playing guitar in my bedroom in suburbia, Chicago suburbia, back in the late 70s, it was because there was magic. There was something. There was adventure and wonder and awe, and I wasn't finding that in my neighborhood. um, and that's still true. It's still true, but we have to be very careful to not lose that in the cacophony of everything else that goes on. And you know what? There's plenty of art that when you do art professionally, there's plenty of art you produce that does not give you that. And that's the business of art. And that's okay too. That's perfectly okay too. But when you can chase that magic and find it and take care of it and nurture it and not squash it with technology, work will always find you. Work will always find you, because there's not enough of that.
I completely agree with that. That is wisdom pouring out all over that statement. So, man, you've taken us on a journey. You've brought us from your maybe preteen bedroom with the guitar all the way through to this fancy studio sitting behind you, which you probably wouldn't call fancy, but it does what it needs to do. What advice, Greg, would you have for the artist who wants to make a living from their craft? What would you say are like the top 2 or 3 things that sum up your experience to be successful in that regard?
Wow, I could give you 33, but you didn't ask for that. So, okay, I'd say number one is, and this actually is the same, John, we went through this when we decided to do ministry at a pastoral level. It's the same question you have to ask. I would put this number one. You have to ask yourself, can I live my life and not do this? And unless the answer is no, don't do it. Like, I know that sounds harsh, but don't get into the arts for money or a career. It's there, but if I do this stuff because I can't not. I went through my 2 or 3 years because God was breaking me down to build me back up. That had to happen for a reason. But you hear the way I describe music, and that's whether it's playing guitar, worship at church, recording, it's all the same to me. That's all the same thing. And for me, it's very connected to my faith, even though I do plenty of music and recording in secular settings. even plenty of my own music. But to me, it's all the same thing. But the point is that it's just like breathing. Like I couldn't not do it. Um, you know, my three kids, as they were growing up, and I would give them parental advice when it came to deciding vocation. What I always told them this one simple thing, and I don't know if it's, to me, it's good advice. What I told them is, think about a time where you would be a grown up and you'd have to work a job that you didn't like and you'd be there all day. And then think about coming home and being excited to finally getting to do the thing that you love to do. Picture what that is, and then figure out how to get people to pay you to do that so that you don't have to wait till you get home after being stuck at work all day to do it. You know, in other words, get people to pay you money to do what you love. And to summarize, don't, that's my number one advice. Don't attempt to do art for a career unless you just can't not, because you will have lean times. You will have uh, many weeks or even months go by where you have no money coming in. You have to be okay with that. Not permanently, but you have to see the big picture. Um, and you know, and you'll also have to crank out a bunch of art that's not magic to you, and you have to also be okay with that. Like, you know, if those two things aren't cutting it for you, just keep it as a hobby so you can love it. You know, like there's no shame in that. You know, and I think most people are wired more for the do it for sport type thing. Um, so that'd be my number one. The only good reason to do it is that you can't not, and that you really have to have sober conversation with yourself and be really honest. Otherwise, you'll find yourself miserable. Um, the second one I would say is uh, you're being great at what you do is a given, but it's not a guarantee. You know, many people spend 100% of their time just getting good at the thing, and they don't realize that there's just all kinds of stuff that's way more important in the big picture. I mean, you can't be bad at what you do and expect to monetize it, but uh, people skills, uh, financial skills, just having the ability to make a budget and stay on it. Um, you know, organizational skills. These are frightening things to most creatives that just sound terrible. uh, and you don't have to be like in love with those things, but you have to understand that they're the you know, if your creative motivation is the gas in your tank and your art is the car, uh, things like, budgeting and relational skills, those are the wheels. You know, they if they fall off, you're on the side of the road. It doesn't matter if you got a full tank of gas and a beautiful car, you're not going anywhere. People don't like working with rude people. They just don't. And I'm blown away by how many creative people I've worked with, but not for long, because they don't care that they're absolute jerks. I mean, it just blows me away, and they just don't care. Like, it's like, deal with me. And you can't be good enough to continue to maintain a client base if you are not personable and thoughtful and considerate and just a good person. You know, I mean, it's the like I say, it's an essential and it's overlooked. They don't teach that in school. They don't, but it's absolutely necessary. You know, you're in a studio, you're vulnerable. You're laying your heart out to someone, and in a raw form too, because it's not even the finished product. You know, it's one thing when your album is mixed and prettied up and done and you present it to the world, that's a frightening thing in of itself. But to take your raw idea, warts and all, and share it with someone, you're in a very vulnerable place as an artist, and that privilege has to be taken seriously and with a lot of care negotiated. Relational skills are so important, and again, if you're not able to navigate sporadic income and living within your means, you've painted yourself in a corner that you can't get yourself out of. And so those types of things are just really important. And I think they've killed many careers, by not having or not paying attention to those skills. And at that point, yeah, you might be the greatest artist in the world, but it's not going to matter. Those are probably my top two. I mean, I guess the third one is obvious, which is, yeah, hone your craft. If you're the nicest person in the world and you've mastered those other things, and you have the nicest tires on a beater car that breaks down all the time, that won't get you anywhere either. So you have to be gifted at what you do. But I just think, invariably the skill set gets over exaggerated, and the softer side skills get forgotten, and those wind up killing a lot more careers than the our craft is something we're always working at. So I listen to stuff I engineered or mixed even a year ago and I cringe, and that's good,
Yeah.
because it means that I'm better now. And that should always be the case. So we're always imperfect and we're always going to get better. That's fine. But if you can do it with grace and compassion, you're going to get a lot farther.
Yeah, that's good stuff. What's next for you? What's on the list?
Well, from a recording studio, I'll just keep it to the recording studio side of things. Obviously, COVID has changed everything for everybody. My studio, which now is, we're talking almost a quarter century now. That's insane. Like, time has flown by. It has been, it started as just my personal little, for my wife and I, to my full-time career for a couple of years, where that was literally my only source of income, to various forms of, on the continuum of, half my income, more than half, less than half. Now it's lived for the last 10 years or so in what I call, it supports my pastor habit. This one too well, John, because
Mm-hmm.
we're devoted to pastoring a church where we're just lean on the finances, and we don't pull full time. I mean, we work. I would say we work full time, but it doesn't fully fund our lives. So we need, yeah, side hustle isn't the right way to put it, because I would say they're sort of like dual, um, you know, things that we're fully committed to, and they just run alongside each other. And there's actually a lot of overlap too, which is great. But so for me, the studio will continue in that way. I mean, probably a good chunk of the time I'm out here in the studio these days, I'm doing stuff for the church, or artists that exist within the church, and that's great. So some of that's not monetized in terms of my studio sending out an invoice. That's okay. Um, but for the past couple months now, and indefinitely, I can't have people in the studio, so that has really curtailed um, the type of work I can do, because unless an artist is able to record their stuff at home and send me files, which plenty are, so that kind of work continues. But for those that aren't, and I get a lot of, I've had this week alone 3 different clients call saying, when can I come in? I'm like, I still can't tell, they're ready to go, but unfortunately I'm not, for my own reasons, you know, among which my wife would be categorized in the uh, most vulnerable if she were to get COVID. So um, I've got a responsibility to, keep myself distanced more than maybe a lot of people think they would need to.
Hmm.
And she's very active here in the studio too. She does all kinds of stuff, vocal instruction, guitar and piano instruction. She's got an online thing she does, and she does Skype lessons. So she's in here a lot. My son works out of here as well. He teaches guitar. All that is transitioned to online, and had already been doing that. So we were sort of ahead of the curve, which is good. Um, but this time has allowed me to kind of think about the future of uh, Grevan Studios, because um, I'm finding, yeah, I turned 56 last month, and um, I'm starting to. I've had a couple of my own personal pet projects that are coming to fruition. That's been really wonderful. I've went years where there's been no time for me to do any of my own stuff at all, and I've kind of fallen back in love with that. Um, and although I do need income from Grevan Studios, I found that I can get enough income from doing remote stuff that I don't really need to have physical people in the studio, out of necessity. And although I love that, because I'm that's kind of always been a thing for me, tracking bands, like, because that's my world, and I get that. And even though my studio is not real big from a footprint size, I can record bands in here, and that's a real sweet spot for me. And it's been a really major function of what the studio has always done. But I guess what I'm trying to say is I think I see myself transitioning to more remote, um, continuing to do the online thing. I think the new normal, it will be a new normal. And I actually, I took down the website for the studio, and stopped any form of advertisement at least 10 years ago now.
Hmm.
Um, just because I have all the work I can handle, and I prefer to sort of vet my clients. And there were plenty of years where I had to take whatever I could get, and that's cool too. But just as a result of where I'm at now, I don't need to do that. So, um, I can kind of curate the work that comes in, and I think that's probably where I'm headed. I do have some projects that are in limbo, that are band projects, that I'll have to figure out what to do when the it's we get the all clear. But I think in general, I'm probably going to pivot away from as much people in the studio, and start working more with clients. Probably do more mixing, more session work, where we're piecemealing. I might receive files and do guitar tracks and send them off, or I receive files from artists, and I mix them, or edit them, or things like that. So um, and I like how leveraged the studio is for personal products, and the church. Like, I love that. We're blessed. We've got you know audio and video editing and recording at a pretty high level for our church, which is kind of cool. Um, and I like that. I don't want to stop doing that. So the other final thing I think I'm probably starting to realize is that I think I'd like to start, it's just my age, I'm starting to think more about handing off to the next generation. So I think I'd like to start maybe doing some, you know, online and in-person training and using the studio more for that, to help younger people get up to speed, so they can start doing their version of what I do. So it's sort of like giving giving back to the next generation. A lot of what I learned on my own, and that's fine indeed. But boy, it's helpful if you have someone who not only is willing to train you, but kind of is your champion and encourages you too. And I would like to be that. So yeah, I think that's where Grevan Studios is heading. So.
Well, that all makes sense, knowing you as well as I do, and you're certainly going to be excellent at that, at bringing along the next generation of creatives. They're going to be really blessed to have you speaking into their lives from the breadth of experience that you have. So thanks, man. Thanks for being my guest. It's so cool to have you here, to have my best friend here. So I'm thrilled to be able to do this. So, Greg has had a big impact on me in a lot of regards. And I'm really, really grateful to have him in my life, and to have an artist who is as creative as I feel I am, and as savvy as I humbly believe I am in a different medium or different mediums, is really cool. Because when you can come up alongside somebody who does something with talent and excellence that isn't an exact mirror of what you do, it tends to show you things that you wouldn't ordinarily think of. You see things in a different light through a different prism, and he being close to him has made me a better artist, and better in a lot of regards too. And it's cool to have a creative friend who just kind of understands the language that I speak from time to time that maybe other people wouldn't. So I'm really grateful for you, Greg.
Mutual.
Ha
That's exactly how I would describe you and our relationship as well. I've learned so many things just from hearing your heart and your brain and your the world that you live in, and you inviting me into it, that has spilled over into the way, I guess, my ethos. It might not be from a technical standpoint, although I've learned plenty of that from you as well. I'm not a visual artist per se, but yeah, it's again, getting to my now advancing age, I realize that the, the type of friendship that we have is extremely rare. Like, you can have plenty of acquaintances, work relationships, casual friendships, or uh, you know uh, situational relation. Like, hey, I'm at this job, and so these are my friends. When you leave, pretty much, you know, we don't stay connected type thing, other than happy birthday on Facebook. But to have like someone who really gets you is, that's really rare. And when you find those relationships, man, prioritize them. You put in the work. John, honestly, like, this whole thing for me has just felt like a lot of other days, when we just talk. That's just what we do, and it's really awesome. And it's time well spent, in a lot of ways. But creatives need people, because most of the world will never get us. They just won't, and that's okay. But we need to find people who do, and then invest into those relationships. So yeah, you're definitely
Absolutely.
that for me.
Thanks, man. We got to do an episode around friendship, I think, in creativity, because I think, just as you said, there's too many artists who kind of, everything's behind a wall, and not necessarily by their choice. It just hasn't happened. And creative, I was probably not the way to put it. I would say creative friendships that are with people who understand what it is that you do. If you're lawyers, if you're artists, whatever it is, it's just beneficial because you're able to work through scenarios. And yeah, it's cool. It's good stuff. So well, without any more, because we could probably talk another 3 hours, which would be okay, but then I'd have to edit
We
a lot.
probably will as soon as we hang up.
Probably. But I just want to thank you for being here. Greg really is a breakthrough creative, and what you shared today is just so it's helpful to me. I know it'll be beneficial to other artists, and so with that, I'm going to close us out. This is Greg Eichelberger with Grevan Studios. I'll have his contact information in the show notes, and he's very approachable, by the way. And I'm John McDavitt for the Breakthrough Creative, where we talk about the business of art and the art of business. So go create something, and I hope that you go make a living with it. Have a great day.
Cheers.
Cool. Thanks.